The name of this sermon is Limits. Maybe some of us don't like that word. Recently I was speaking to a friend, actually it was just this week, I was speaking to a friend and I recommended a book to her, and the title of the book is Boundaries. And I noticed that she visibly tensed at the title. And she explained her reaction. You have to understand, she said, I bristle at the word boundaries because it sounds like repression. It sounds like you're trying to push me down and put me in a box and keep me from being myself. Now, I know that she grew up in a very strict environment, and so that response makes sense to me. But I think that for many of us, regardless of how we were raised, many of us have been trained to react negatively to a word like boundaries or a word like limits. Yet one of the most obvious things that we can say about the Christian faith is that it places limits on our lives. Scripture is full of these imperatives. Don't live this way. Live this way. Commands. In the passage we just read, it talks about rules and precepts and testimonies. Perhaps it's precisely these kinds of limits that make us sometimes wonder if we really want to follow Jesus after all. Will following Jesus make me boring? Does it mean that I miss out on the good stuff, on being fully alive? Does a life of faith actually fence me in, put me in a box, diminish my humanity? I have a handful of friends who think so. Maybe you do too. Or maybe these questions trouble you as well. So I want to get at these questions this morning by looking at this portion of Scripture, which comes from the most comprehensive celebration of God's law, Psalm 119. It's the longest chapter in the Bible, 176 verses. And almost every single verse has something about the word, or the law, or statutes, or testimonies, or precepts, or commandments, or statutes, or rules. And we think about those things as limiting our freedom. And that's true. Yet in this section of the psalm, we find this powerful and counterintuitive truth. And here it is. That the limitations of love are actually liberating. True freedom is found not in the absence of limitations, but in embracing the right limitations. Those that will unleash fullness and flourishing with Christ. True freedom is not the absence of limitations, but finding the right limitations. The limitations will actually focus and guide me into a life that is truly free. So I want to look at this morning in three different movements. So here are my headings. Life, design, and freedom. Life, design, and freedom. Let's take the first one. Life. Give me life, according to your word, the psalmist says. Notice that the primal cry of this psalmist is for more life, not less, for greater vitality. And he voices this desire through two different powerful images. Verse 25, my soul clings to the dust. Give me life, according to your word. Then again in verse 28, my soul melts away for sorrow. Strengthen me according to your words. So there's those two images. One is an image of my soul clinging to the dust, as low as I could possibly be. Another is an image of melting away with sorrow. And in both cases, the psalmist asks for more life. Have you ever felt this way? Like dust, or like your soul, your very soul was melting away. I talked to a friend just a couple days ago, and he said, my wife just said to me, I feel like I'm fading away. What do you do when you feel that? When you feel that emptiness, when you long for fullness, when you long for something that will make you come alive again. For most of us, what we do is we distract ourselves. There's no shortage of opportunities to distract ourselves. Remember a few years ago when I was in youth ministry, before people walked around with these little computers in their pockets, a student told me, my computer broke this week. And he said, it's so lonely. It's so lonely. Notice he didn't say, I was bored. He said, it's lonely. And a lot of times when we feel I'm bored, what we really mean is, I'm lonely. I feel disconnected. This student was honest about his emptiness, an emptiness that he numbs through distraction. But when the distraction is taken away, you are forced to confront the emptiness in your soul. And to whom do you cry out in those moments? Do you distract? Or maybe you self-destruct. You make bad choices. Maybe because temporarily they make you feel like you are coming alive. You hurt others because it makes you feel alive. What do you do with your emptiness? Look at what the psalmist does. Notice that in his emptiness, he cries out for life, for strength, for fullness, for vitality. But notice that he does not believe that fullness will be found in rejecting God's law, in rejecting God's rules, but in leaning into them, in embracing them. So he consistently chooses the limits of God's law. I have chosen the way of faithfulness, he says in verse 30. I set your rules before me. I cling to your testimonies, verse 31. Verse 32, I will run in the way of your commandments. All of these different images saying that the way that I will find life is through limiting myself to the law. We don't normally think this way. I feel so dead. So I will set your rules before me. I'm so empty. So what I will do is I will cling to your commands. Because to us, that doesn't sound like fullness. That doesn't sound like freedom. That sounds like rules. That sounds like restriction. That sounds like religion. And our instinct is right on at least one level. Because limitations can be life-giving, but not just any limits. Limits, for the sake of limitation, are a dead end. They don't help anyone. Life-giving limits are the ones that enable you to become who or what you are designed to be. I'll give you 2 examples. First example, a kite. Imagine a kite that has come loose from its string. Now, it may have the appearance of freedom, but it's truly actually not free. It's at the mercy of the fickle wind. It just goes wherever the wind blows. It's lost its freedom. It's lost its purpose. It can't really be a kite as it's meant to be. Because a kite is meant to be flown, not to just drift in the fickle wind. But give it a restriction. Anchor it with a string and tether it to a person with a skillful hand, and you enable the kite to soar higher and higher on the wind as it has been designed to do. Or think of a fish. A fish that has washed up on the beach is not in a bowl. It's free in that sense. And in a much more fundamental sense, that fish has lost its freedom. It can't do what a fish is designed to do. But give it a different restriction. Limit the fish to water, and you will set it free. Freedom is not the absence of restrictions. Freedom is about the presence of the right restrictions, those that will unleash you into what you were meant to be. I say this all the time in youth ministry to my students. Jesus didn't come to make you boring. Jesus came to unleash you into who you were made to be. So we need to ask, what were we made for? So that when we give ourselves to that thing, it will set us free. Restrictions and rules by themselves don't bring anyone to life. Lots of religious people have tried them, coming up with lots of restrictions, thinking that the restrictions by themselves would bring people to life. But the restrictions that bring you to life are the ones that are designed by the one who made you. The limitations of love are liberating. So this brings us to the next movement now. Design. Because fullness can only be measured in light of design. How do you know if a fish is free? Well, you measure that by what it was designed for. How do you know if a kite is free? Well, you measure it by what it was designed for. How do you know if a human being is free? Well, you measure it by what a human being was made for, designed to do. Make me to understand the way of your precepts, the psalmist says. Now, interestingly, 5 of the 8 verses in this section start with the same Hebrew word, the word derek, like the name, Derek. Derek means way, it means path, it means a way or manner of life. And this is the organizing theme of this entire section. finding the right way in the world. In fact, there's a wonderful progression here. Verse 26, I told you of my ways, you answered me. Verse 27, make me to understand the way of your precepts. Verse 29, put false ways far from me. Verse 30, I have chosen the way of faithfulness. Verse 32, I will run in the way of your commandments. So notice the progression here. First, I tell God my ways. Then I ask to understand God's ways. Then I put false ways away from me. Then now, having put the false ways away, I consistently choose his ways. And finally, I run in freedom in the way of his testimonies. Billy Joel sings, she's got a way about her. Don't know what it is. But the truth is that all of us have a way about us. We have a certain shape to our life, a way that we consistently live and act, a derrick. And the psalmist is convinced that there is actually also a way to the world. A way that has been designed and ordered, structured so that the only way that I find my place is not by looking deep within myself and asking, what do I want? But by looking outside myself and asking to know the way, the shape, from the one who made it. When the psalmist asks to understand God's ways, he's looking for help from the designer. And so he says, your word limits me, shapes me, guides me to find freedom in life. Oftentimes when we think of freedom, there's this false picture that holds us captive. It goes like this. There's really no intended design to the world. There's no shape. It's not meant to be anything in particular. And so if anybody says, this is the way, walk in it, that must be oppressive. God must be a tyrant. God's rules must be those of an arbitrary, power-hungry dictator who's telling us what to do. The man bent on keeping the people down. But for the psalmist, God is not a dictator. God is a designer. And we are his masterpieces. His works of art. His poem. And his design is not to make us boring, but to unleash us as his masterpieces on the world. Because if there really is someone who made your soul, who knew you in your mother's womb, and shaped you to be who you are, then the only way you find your purpose, the pattern, the truth, the life, the way, is if you go to the soul maker and say, make me understand the way of your precepts. Put false ways, the ones that lead to dead ends, far from me. I have chosen the way of faithfulness. I will run in the way of your commandments, because freedom is found in doing what you've been made to do. It would be easy to misunderstand what I'm saying here, to think that I'm saying something like this. Lower your expectations. Fit into God's mold. Conform to the pattern. Stop wanting so much. And nothing could be further from the truth of this passage. What the psalmist wants is to run. To have an enlarged heart. God's design is not to make us boring, but to unleash us into a far richer freedom. God's laws are limitations that are designed to liberate our hearts, to liberate our humanity, and not to suppress them. G.K. Chesterton puts it this way. The more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it had established a rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild. To focus you in the way of the good and to run wild. Go for broke. Live to the full. What if it's truly the case that you are only actualizing 5 to 10% of your humanity right now? And that you are content to live at such a low level when God's design for you is to live so much more. But the only way that you will actualize that is if you will embrace the limitations of love and so be liberated. And this brings us to the final movement. freedom. That's what we want. Freedom. I will run in the way of your commandments when you enlarge my heart. Another translation, NIV, says this: I will run in the way of your commandments, for you have set my heart free. In whatever translation we use, the emphasis here is that as we give ourselves to God's commandments, our hearts actually grow bigger. That they acquire greater capacities, greater freedom, these wide open spaces in which to run. And that's beautiful to me, because remember how this section started with this heartbreaking image: my soul clings to the dust. And now we end with this image of freedom and joy, where this person whose soul was in the dust now is running. That God can take you from here to there as you give yourself to the Word. It's beautiful. Not only are you out of the dust, now you are fully alive, running in the way of His commandments. So remember the progression. You tell Him your ways. You understand His ways. You put away false ways. You choose His ways. And then you can run. That's a picture of freedom. The freedom that we were made for. But it's a different kind of freedom. It's not just freedom from, it's freedom for. There are all kinds of ways that if you live without limits and do whatever the heck you want, you will actually become less free. You become addicted, you become unhealthy, you become sick, you become tired, you become ruled by your emotions, ruled by whatever wind is the strongest. And there are all kinds of ways that if you restrict yourself, you actually become more free. For example, if you restrict yourself through healthy eating, you are released into the deeper freedom of good health. If you limit yourself through exercise, you are liberated into greater athletic capabilities. You can jump higher. You can run faster. You can play longer. Malcolm Gladwell wrote that book, Outliers, in which he found that the difference between the truly elite people in any sport or in any musical instrument is really about 10,000 hours of extra time that one person has put in over the other. 10,000 hours of focused limitation. But that focused limitation sets the person free. If you discipline yourself through instrumental practice, you are given freedom to play with virtuosity. The reward of discipline, focused limitation, is freedom. So too, the reward of embracing God's focused limitation is liberation. So for the most part, I hate to run. I try to do other things because I don't like to run. But I have had moments while running, few and far between, where I feel like I'm flying. And it's not work, it's not painful, I'm actually somehow enjoying it. Athletes talk all the time about the game coming to them, or opening up for them, or slowing down for them. And it's like they begin to play instinctively, almost from muscle memory. They get into the flow. Or musicians will say the same thing. You're not even thinking anymore. You're just playing, because all of the training and all of the practice and all of the discipline has unleashed you to be able to play on a level that you never would have been able to do before. And that's the goal. The goal's not the practice. The goal's not the discipline. The goal is the freedom that the discipline unleashes you into. The goal is the freedom, not the limitation, but the life that the limitations unleash within you. If that's the way it is with playing an instrument, if that's the way it is with being an athlete, how much more must it be the case with living a life that is fully free? If we allow God's word to limit us, to focus our hearts on what is good, to put false ways away from us, how much more will we be unleashed into a level of life that was inaccessible to us without it. Chariots of Fire is a movie that tells the story of runners preparing for the 1924 Olympics. And one of them is a devout Scotsman named Eric Liddell. And Liddell is preparing for missionary service in China, but along the way he trains to compete in the Olympics, though he refuses to race on Sunday. And the sister asks him why if he's called to missionary service, he is taking the time to train and run in the Olympics. And he says, God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. If you've seen the movie, at the end of the movie, there's this sense of divine pleasure that is evoked as you watch it. He starts running, and it's a textbook form up into a certain point, and then he begins to run like a wild animal. It's like this. Really bad form. But a beautiful picture of a person who is fully alive. And even if you hate running like I do, there's a freedom there, a vitality and a joy that is really quite beautiful. And I think that's the kind of picture we're meant to have when we read this psalm. I will run, right, in the way of your commandments because you have enlarged my heart. I am convinced, and this is really something that landed on me about 5 years ago that has been transformative. That true freedom is not the absence of limitations, but finding and leaning into the right limitations. Limitations that are life-giving and liberating. My marriage vows limit me to one woman, but they also set me free. My children limit me profoundly. But my children have also opened up enormous space for me to experience love and joy and grace. God's word limits me, but its limitations ultimately give me life. So if and when you decide to follow Jesus, you limit your freedom. You ask to know his ways, you choose them, you put false ways far from you. You don't do whatever you want. You do hard things. But along the way, as you discover this new way of living, you begin to find that your heart is actually getting bigger. That you are more joyful. You are more patient. You are more at peace. You still feel pain deeply, but even deeper is hope. And you thought you were giving up freedom, but the truth is that you were getting it. And increasingly you find that you are able not just to walk with God, but to run. Just had Christmas, and so maybe you could evoke the image of the Grinch whose heart grows 3 sizes in one day. That's the image. As we give ourselves to the limitations of love, that our hearts begin to grow. As we obey God, God imparts his life and strength to us, but not just that. He enlarges your heart. He enlarges your capacity to love. He gives you a greater capacity to serve, a greater capacity to rejoice and weep. And you're able to do things and feel things that you never would have been able to before. Your spiritual senses begin to function correctly again. So that the more you love him, the more you see him. And the more you see him, the more you love him. And the more you love him, the more you see him. And the more you see him, the more you love him. And all through the process, your heart grows to contain the ever greater love that is being poured into it. And that is fullness. That is freedom. It works the opposite way too. As you choose false ways, as you turn from hearing the word, as you tune your heart to itself, your heart actually begins to shrink. Your spiritual sensitivity dulls, it deadens. And not only do you not feel the freedom to run, you have trouble walking, moving, you stay where you are because you've shut yourself off from the life-giving word. And left to ourselves, we would have no hope. We would say, my soul clings to the dust, and we have no choice but to stay there, to lie on the ground like we were dead. The good news, and regardless of where you are, or how much your heart has shrunken during 2018, the good news is always that God speaks life into dead things. And it's never too late to begin to live the life that you were meant to live. The psalmist prays that God would give him life from the Word, because life also always comes from the Word. Hundreds of years after the psalmist writes this prayer, John writes this in the opening of his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. This is life. This is freedom. To receive the Word, Jesus Christ, breathed out by the power of the Holy Spirit. To know the one who died for you and rose again. The one who sends you into the world, listening to his heartbeat and moving his hands and feet. The one who died in your place and rose again. The one who speaks to set your heart free so that you would not just lie in the dust. So that you would not just walk in his ways, but so that you could run as he enlarges your heart. It's the last Sunday of the year. I love the last Sunday of the year, and I love the first Sunday of the year because I like new beginnings. I like the opportunity for new beginnings and the hope that no matter how bad 2018 has been, that tomorrow can be better than today, this year can be better than last year. Because God is always bigger and better than we think. So let me finish with this wonderful passage from C.S. Lewis's children's story, Prince Caspian. After coming back into the magical land of Narnia, Lucy finally sees the great lion, Aslan. And this is how Lewis writes. And then, oh joy, for he was there, the huge lion, shining white in the moonlight, with his huge black shadow underneath him. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy, you're bigger. That is because you are older, little one, answered he. Not because you are? I am not. But every year you grow, you will find me bigger. How do you know if you are growing spiritually? If Jesus keeps getting bigger. If he's getting smaller. If he fails to captivate your heart, then something is askew. And you need to lean in to the limitations of love so that you can see him again, to push the false ways away so that you can see him again, because every year you grow, he keeps getting bigger and better and more beautiful. Life gets more complex. The pain gets deeper. The grace keeps on getting deeper with it. If Jesus keeps getting bigger and better and more beautiful, day after day, year after year, through the ups and downs, through our fear, doubt, and unfaithfulness, Jesus is bigger and better and more beautiful, and there will always be more of him to see. The limitations of love are liberating. The boundaries of the book lead to more life, not less. What are the right limitations that you need to embrace this year in order to allow your life to be unleashed this year? Perhaps it is discipleship. Perhaps it is that consistent time where the first thing you do before you pick up your phone is pick up the limitations of life to liberate you. What do you need to lean into so that you can be unleashed? May it be this year that we begin to run in the way of his commandments, and that he would enlarge our lives. Let's pray. God, for many dangers, toils, and snares we have already come this year. And yet our deep hope for next year is not the changing of the calendar, but the power of your Spirit opening our eyes to see Jesus, working through the Word to unleash and open our hearts, to help us believe that tomorrow can be better than today, because you are in tomorrow, just as you are in today. Help us take the next faithful step. Help us lean into the limitations of love, so that we might walk in the ways of your testimonies as we were meant to be. We love you, and we offer ourselves to you with joy. In Jesus' name, amen.